Page 230 of The Unfolding is the story of Brandon Heath.
I was pretty upset with my dad at the time. He said, your dad is your earthly father, and he's doing the best that he can. Your heavenly father loves you and wants you to forgive your earthly father. I was more than open. It's like I had found what I was looking for.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Another page in The Unfolding.
Hi, this is Meredith Foster. When Brandon Heath heard the gospel as a teenager, he was hungry for truth, for love, for healing. His parents' broken relationship had left him hurting and carrying a heavy load of resentment. So when he heard that God is love, and more specifically, that God loved him, it was life-changing. But transformation and healing take time. God was putting people in Brandon's life, including a guy named Bob Goff, mentors who saw things in Brandon that he couldn't see in himself. Brandon Heath is a singer and songwriter who's been nominated for multiple Grammys. He's won 8 Dove Awards for songs like Give Me Your Eyes, See Me Through It, and I'm Not Who I Was.
I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, believe it or not. Mom and Dad were not musicians. Mom was a hairdresser. Dad was a police officer. At least he would become a police officer. And big music fans. So we had music in the house, but I didn't really grow up in the music industry, just in Music City. But for me, Nashville was just another town. And honestly, back then, I was born in 78, so we're talking late 70s, early 80s. It really did feel like a small town. We had 3 skyscrapers downtown Nashville. You really didn't want to go downtown. There were honky-tonks, but it was not a super safe part of town, you know, where now it is where all the tourists flock, is down to Lower Broad or to Country Music Hall of Fame. But there was Music Row, and when I got into high school, that is when I had a couple of buddies. I had 2 best friends. We were the 3 amigos. It was a guy named Troy Miller, Daniel Parkhurst, and me. Troy's dad worked on Music Row. Now, Music Row is this street off of downtown, 16th Avenue, that would lead you into downtown Nashville. And it was full of studios and publishing houses, and I thought it was so cool. My stepdad had worked he was a CPA for an accounting firm. His office was also on Music Row. And so I was familiar with that area, but it was really the only place that you might see a country music star. You didn't really see them around town, but you might see them like getting out of their car and going into a studio.
Do you remember the first time you saw somebody that you were like, oh my goodness?
Yes, I do. And it was because of Troy, my best friend. So Troy's dad was Mark Miller, and Mark Miller was an engineer who engineered all of the Garth Brooks records. So if you go and look in the liner notes, Mark Miller is the engineer. Alan Reynolds is the producer. They co-owned a studio together called Jack's Tracks. And Troy we'd go by for money, whatever, you know, like normal kids would.
Like kids do with dad, right.
But I also happen to be a massive Garth Brooks fan.
Oh my goodness.
So I would come up for reasons that let's go by the studio, you know? And that's where I would see Garth. And he was there quite a bit.
Wow.
Yeah, he was. And we're talking early 90s. We're talking the height of his...
He's like the biggest...
stardom.
Man in town.
And
wow.
I will say he was always great. Very normal. I mean, had tons of charisma, you know, but genuinely a great dude.
Wow.
And you hear that consistently about Garth. You don't really hear any nightmare stories about him. So thankfully, my early experience with a country music star was great. And I think that's what kind of gave me this idea that maybe I could be a part of the music industry.
Were you musical? I mean, did you start playing an instrument when you were young? How did that go?
I started playing guitar when I was in 8th grade.
Yeah.
So about the time that I would have met Troy and Daniel, I started playing the guitar because of a girl that I had a crush on. She played the guitar as well. That was my motivation. That's what most boys' motivations are.
I've heard that before.
When we are, coming to understand or at least experience hormones for the first time. So that was the beginning of my music journey. Faith came in when I was 16. So really on the heels of me learning guitar, starting to write songs, I came to know Jesus. And I came to know Jesus through an outreach called Young Life. Young Life is a youth-focused outreach ministry. So, yeah.
The stereotype of Nashville is there's a church on every corner and everybody knows Jesus. So
it's true.
Did you grow up with any kind of religious background or?
No.
I mean, maybe it just goes against stereotype. I don't know that it's unusual.
There is a church on every corner. That is absolutely true. Everybody assumes that they are Christian.
Oh.
It's part of the
cultural thing.
Culture, really, I think of America, of the heartland. I mean, you're from Illinois, where if you're American, you're born American by the grace of God, They kind of go together, and you just believe I'm a Christian, I celebrate Easter. I celebrate Christmas. Therefore, I am a Christian. But I had never... I had been to church with my grandparents, and I had certainly heard a few things in the sermon, but I was really young. Now when I say I went to church with my grandparents, we're talking 2 or 3 times a year, because they lived in Waverly, which is outside of Nashville. It's a really small town, awesome little town. But that was my only exposure, was through my grandparents. And I used to love to hear my granddad, Paul Petty. He had this deep baritone, and I loved to hear him sing in church. It almost rattled when he would sing. I could feel it, not just hear it.
Wow.
That would have been my only exposure to the gospel before Young Life. And then Young Life being an outreach to high school kids, we would meet at somebody's house in their great room or their backyard. We'd sing songs, we would play games, and then there would be about 8 minutes where one of the leaders, who was either a college student from Vanderbilt or Belmont, would share a little bit of their story, maybe an anecdote or two, and then the gospel and how it goes together. And that is how I came to hear the gospel for the first time. Went to a summer camp that summer, and met Jesus on the 9th hole of the Frisbee golf course.
Oh my God.
That's where I gave my life to Jesus.
The first time you really heard it at Young Life, was there an immediate appeal to you?
Yeah.
Was there something in you that was like, now this makes sense?
It didn't make total sense to me, but that was me exercising faith for the very first time. You know what I mean? I would not call myself an intellectual, but I certainly will let my heart lead me. And I was so hungry for love, for belonging, kind of the thing that every teenager is hungry for. Not to say that faith is not for intellectuals, because there are so many intellectuals who have come to study and understand the scripture, who believe that there's a God more than ever. There are skeptics who only now in their 80s are coming to know God. And there's a pride in some of us, especially us men. We don't want to admit to there being a greater, higher power, It's just too much of a hit to our ego.
Well, it's giving up control.
That's right. Yeah. So, When you're a kid, I think you are either really open or maybe you've been hurt and you're very closed, Mm-hmm. I had been really hurt and I was open. I was protective, but I also was really hungry. And when I heard about Jesus, when I remember him saying God is love, because I thought God was something very different. I thought God is judgment.
Right.
I am not good enough, but God says that I am because of Jesus, because Jesus says that I'm good enough. But I also felt compelled. And, there's a debate on whether God calls us to him or we find him, if we are elected by him or if it's open to everybody. All I know is God calls me to love everybody without discrimination. I will let him decide. That's not up to me. But I am to love everyone. And so I don't get hung up on the predestination thing. But as I said before, I'm not super heady about that kind of stuff. I just go on my gut, and I feel like I've always belonged to God. It took me a while to find him.
9th hole of the Frisbee golf course?
Yeah.
What was the context?
Playing Frisbee golf, usually on day 5 of camp. So camp would be like 7 days. Usually on day 5, you've heard every talk. The leaders, the Young Life leaders, kind of have a meeting. And, okay, today's day 5. This is the day we really want you to find some quality time with your kids. And that's what's different about Young Life, is that your camp counselors, they come with you and they go home with you. And you have a relationship with them. You have a history. So my Young Life leader, Stu, sat down with me and we prayed the prayer. I remember specifically him saying, because I was pretty upset with my dad at the time. He said, your dad is your earthly father, and he's doing the best that he can. Your heavenly Father loves you and wants you to forgive your earthly father, And your heavenly Father wants to father you and show you what a father is and how his love is transformative. I remember him saying that.
And you were open to that.
Oh, I was more than open. It's like I'd found what I was looking for. Yeah.
You come home from Young Life camp. Were you the kind of person whose life was pretty radically different right away, or?
No, it was gradual, and honestly, it was years, maybe a decade before my life was really different. Maybe not. Maybe more like 5 years. I mean, I remember coming home. The first thing I did was tell my mom, "Hey, Mom, I'm a Christian. I became a Christian." And she looked at me awkward, like, you're already a Christian, And that's when you realize, wow, I'm calling her not a Christian right now by saying that I've become a Christian.
So did you just shut up?
I did.
Yeah.
I realized what I was.
Some people would have went for that. Like, I've got to convince you. But
no,
good.
Thankfully,
yeah.
I was tender on that one. But I think later in college, I would have had some more pointed conversations with her about coming to really have a relationship with God, which she did. She and my dad both made a profession of faith. She and my dad both are now deceased. My mom, they divorced when I was young, so Mom remarried. She had severe rheumatoid arthritis, which is not a fatal disease, but when you live with pain like she did, you often don't want to live anymore. And that's kind of, I'm not saying that she did not commit suicide or kill herself, but she certainly did not want to live with that kind of pain anymore. And there's a part of me that can't blame her, and then there's a part of me that's really sad about that.
I bet.
That was in 23, she passed away. My dad passed away in 17, but right like a month and a half before my daughter was born, 2 months before my daughter was born, he died of just heart complications from heart disease.
Stu was talking to you about forgiving your dad. Was that was that something you eventually had to do?
Mm-hmm. I remember the day that I did it. My mom had told me about some things my dad had done when I was young, and they were married, I think, 7 years. My mom was not supposed to have children. She had really bad endometriosis. Was told that she would not be able to have a child, and then here I am. So they were married 3 years with me. So the 4 years prior, it just wasn't a good marriage. And I think when I came along, it got worse.
Oh.
My dad just disengaged. He did his own thing. So I needed to forgive him. And I told Dad, I said, he came to college, came to my school, and we sat out in his truck. And I said, Dad, I just want you to know, I know a lot about you and your marriage to my mom, and I know why you divorced, because we had never talked about it, really.
Had you been thinking about having this conversation for years?
Yeah.
But this is the day it finally
I felt too young, and honestly, my dad should have been a lawyer. He was really good at arguing.
So you didn't want to get into a debate?
No.
Yeah.
Which is really the way the conversation it was very one-sided. I basically said, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to tell you what I know. What I'm going to tell you is I forgive you. I release you of everything that you did because it is more important to me to forgive and for us to have a good relationship. So he just sat there and cried. And I talk about it in my new album, The Ache. I say it specifically. Sat outside in that Chevy. Windows down, he lit a cigarette. I said, Dad, I got to talk to you. He sat there and just listened. I said things he didn't know I knew. Then he cried when I forgave him. That's exactly word for word what happened. And I think sometimes when you're writing a song, the more specific you can be, the more you put your finger on it, people can feel it,
Yes.
So I did that in The Ache.
Wow.
But it changed my relationship with him. It also helped me to set boundaries with him, which unfortunately when we have unhealthy parents, we have to set boundaries, because whether it's manipulation or it's whatever weapon they're using to stunt your growth, you have to come to a place as an adult where you just say, I'm going to take responsibility for me. I'm going to forgive you for things that you did. We don't have to talk about it. We can talk about it if you want to. And I'm going to set boundaries because I'm becoming a man myself. And I am not going to take that stuff with me. And I'm not going to do that to my kids. So
That's pretty amazing maturity for a college age guy. What do you attribute? I mean, that's hard to do at
I
50.
attribute that to having to grow up quickly.
Okay.
And I'm not necessarily excited about that.
Yeah.
That's not like a badge of honor for me. Because there's other areas where my growth was stunted. And I only grew up in some areas a few years ago.
Forgiving his dad was an important marker in the development of Brandon's faith, but there were other areas where the fallout from his childhood had, as he put it, stunted his growth. God was placing relationships in his life that were going to help him grow and heal.
I mentioned Young Life earlier. So I was in Young Life as a teenager, but then I volunteered with Young Life working at a Young Life camp where I would have met Bebo Norman.
Oh.
I wrote a few songs for Bebo. That got me a publishing deal. Young Life they gave me my first audience. They saw something in me. They put me on stage. They really nurtured me. And there were great role models. And there was a woman. Her name was Ann Shackleton, and Ann knows this. I've told Ann. I was talking to her about my dad and my mom, and she was like, Brandon, let me just stop you and tell you, you are not responsible for your parents. And it sounds like you're trying to parent your parents. And she said, that's not your job, and you need to forgive them, and you need to start your own life. And so when you asked me earlier, what would you attribute that to? I'd say Ann Shackleton.
Wow.
You know, she had to have been in her early 40s at the time. She had a lot of wisdom. I think she was in counseling. But anyway, I've told Ann, I was like, you made a huge difference. You gave me permission to let my parents off the hook and move on and love them, show up for them, but start my own life. So, yeah, I've had some great therapists over the years.
Paid and unpaid, right?
Yeah.
So did you always, high school on, did you always think that music was what you wanted to do?
It wasn't clear it was what I would like to do, but I didn't think, I think, like I was saying, having seen the music industry working, I thought, well, that is something that maybe I could do, but being a singer, being the artist was not something I thought I could do. There were a couple reasons. I mean, it's all insecurity, but number one, I was afraid that I would get sick and I would have to cancel shows. It's not like I was a sickly person, but I don't want the pressure.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even to this day, if I'm sick, I'm such a baby about it. I don't want to get out of bed. My wife would tell you, like, I'm the worst. But it's crazy. I've been doing it for almost 20 years, and I've only had to cancel 2 shows from being sick.
Talk about needless fear, right? But
needless fear. Yeah. I think the other thing is just not feeling good enough, to be the artist. I fully had faith in myself as a songwriter, but as the artist, it kind of scared me. And doing interviews and, I was afraid of all that stuff. But turns out I'm actually pretty good at all that stuff.
You are.
You know what I mean? So being an artist was not in the cards. Well, wasn't in my deck of cards, but God knew what I was going to do. And so here I am.
young life starts to nurture that in you. You're up on stage doing that kind of stuff. How did your life go like after college? You were in Nashville for college, so you're already like connected to the music industry, I guess, in a way.
I was, yeah. I mean, my producer was a guy that I was in a men's group with at church. My manager was an elder at my church.
Wow.
And I led worship on occasion at my church. So my first team, my manager, my booking agent, my producer, all went to church with me. And they sought me out because they saw me leading worship and they felt like I had something. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And, you know, that may sound kind of icky, and it could be, I guess, a little bit. But it was more than just a career opportunity for both them and for me. They saw a young man that they really believed in, and they wanted to be a part of that. And I think it was, all of them have made money off of me. but it was more than that. It was mentorship. It was, wow, this is really special. I want to be a part of this. And I want to see this kid succeed. That's what I genuinely felt by those three guys. And one of which I'm still working with, my booking agent. You know, I've been with him forever. And then my producer, Dan Muckala, we wrote last week, and we're writing again next week. He did my first 4 records. Most of my number ones have been with Dan Muckala. So that, yes, growing up in Nashville, that was definitely an advantage because I had this support system around me and my mom's refrigerator if I got hungry. So,
which other starving artists don't have.
Yeah. Enters Matt Wirtz, because we talked about him earlier.
Yes. Okay. How did that happen? How did you get connected?
Okay. So I went to Middle Tennessee State University. I had a small group of guy friends. Now, you have to understand, Middle Tennessee is about 45 minutes outside of Nashville. So, being from Nashville, I did not want to stay in Murfreesboro over the weekends. So, I would leave. I would come home every weekend. But when I was there during the week, I had classes with a handful of guys that are still very good friends of mine.
What were you majoring in, by the way? Music?
At first, it was recording industry.
Okay.
Then it was English. I know.
Okay.
Random. And then I got a publishing deal. As I was telling you, Biba Norman, I had a couple of cuts, so I got a publishing deal. And I'm now almost 5 years into college. I'm like, I just need to get out of here. So I went to my advisor. They had just created a new degree called University Studies.
There you go.
I majored in university. So I graduated with a University Studies degree.
Did you already have enough credits to be done?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I think I had to take a first aid course.
Okay. There you
So
go.
I learned first aid.
You figured out how to be done as fast as you could, which
Yeah.
was smart, right?
Yeah.
Your
I
life
mean,
was
listen,
going a direction. Yeah.
College is not, you don't have to go to college.
That's right.
It's there if you need it, you know?
Yeah.
And it had served its purpose for me.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was kind of like wasting money. So I could have finished my English degree. And I got to be, I want to be transparent about this because now I'm okay with it. But for many years, I lied and said that I had an English degree. And one night,
I totally get the pressure to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I basically did. There were a couple of upper division, hard courses that I did not take to honor my degree. But it didn't sound good. Didn't sound cool to say I've got a university studies degree. So one night, out of conviction, I confessed to my wife, "Hey, I don't."
It went that long?
A long time. Yeah. I would even use it. Like if I was talking about punctuation or whatever. I'm an English major, okay? I would totally lie about it. But the truth is out.
Yeah.
I'm not an English major.
What a relief.
I barely even know what my GPA was. I'm almost 50 and I've done all right for myself.
Yeah, you're good. All right, Matt Wirtz. So how did you meet Matt Wirtz?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there was a small group of guys, young songwriters, one of which was a guy named Dave Barnes.
Oh.
And Dave and I we'd go to this thing called Alpha Omega. It was kind of like a Wednesday night gathering, young professionals. And then there was a club called Student Songwriters Association. And there were, there's like 15 of us. And there were only a few in the room that I thought were pretty good. And I remember them specifically. A guy named BJ Hill, who now is one of the head creative guys at Warner Chapel in Nashville. A guy named Luke Laird, who now lives 4 houses down from me on my street. He's had almost 30 number one country songs.
Wow.
Has his own publishing company, and he wrote my current single. He and I wrote my current single together.
Wow.
During COVID. We're talking like April of COVID. We wrote this song together. So Luke Laird was in that group, and Dave Barnes was in that group. So Dave was friends with Matt. They were both living, in apartments. I was living at my mom's house. Dave introduces me to Matt, and I've just graduated from college. I'm working at Starbucks. Matt says, "Dude, move out of your mom's house and be my roommate," So I did. And so we would have been 23, maybe 24. I can't remember. See, that's another area where I don't want to be honest how old I was and still living with my mom. So anyway, we became roommates. In the meantime, Matt Wirtz and Dave Barnes are a part of this kind of movement coming out of Nashville of independent artists. And to be an indie was a new thing. I mean, there had always been independent artists, but there was this grassroots. Social media was kind of starting to happen with MySpace, and they were forming this kind of like young fan base because they were independent artists, and they were getting on to AAA radio. It's kind of when radio was starting to embrace indie artists, and they were getting this huge fan base. And they were both working with Ed Cash, who is, one of the arguably biggest, not only producers, but songwriters in the Christian world. But Dave and Matt were adamant about not doing Christian music, which was great. They were both people of faith, but they didn't necessarily want to do commerce that way or creativity that way. So I watched them as they launched, and that kind of gave me the fire that I needed to say, I could do this.
Were you kind of on the fence, like at Starbucks, like I might make this work, or
yeah?
The music
I needed to
or?
pay bills.
Well, yeah.
When you jump in as an artist, you're not going to make any money.
Yeah.
I did have my pub deal, but I foolishly spent all of that on artwork. So that's such an artist move.
Do you still have the artwork?
I do. It's probably worth some money now.
All right.
It's actually 4 black and white photographs, which is another story. But so enters in another major player in my life, a guy named Bob Goff.
Oh, how did you meet Bob?
I met Bob at Malibu, the Young Life camp that I was working at. Bob and his family would visit this camp a lot. It's in British Columbia, Canada. And Bob knew that I was a young, budding songwriter. And I remember him having a conversation with me. This would have been in 2000, maybe 2001. Why is it that you just want to be a songwriter? Why don't you want to be a singer? Because you can sing. And, I've already discussed my fears of all that. He said, I want you to come and visit me in California. I want you just to get to know my family, and then let's talk about a plan. 'Cause he said, I want to put wheels on your dreams.
Wow. He's been doing that all his life, I guess. That's so cool.
I know.
Wow.
He would have been in his early 40s
at
that point. So I go to San Diego. It takes me 2 years to get out there because I'm like, this guy's kind of a weirdo.
You were hesitant, or
I was.
Okay.
I thought he wanted to make money off of me. It seemed a little. I had never experienced that sort of generosity, and it was really just investment in time. It was being a mentor. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Finding somebody that you really believe in and you want to help launch them. So I would have gotten to know Bob really in 2002, 2003.
So your early 20s?
Yep.
Is that right?
Mid-20s. So I start working with a producer, with Bob basically saying, I'll help finance your first album.
Oh my goodness.
Go get a producer and let's make this happen. Within 2 months, I have half a record, and my producer, Dan Muckala, who I went to church with, he's like, I can get you a record deal. Do you want a record deal? It's like, yeah, let's get a record deal. I paid Bob back within 2 months.
Wow.
So the next year I sign. The next year I'm up for New Artist of the Year. Bob flies to Nashville with his family to the Dove Awards. And I'm thinking, well, I hope for your sake I win because you've spent a lot of money to be here. And I won.
Wow.
And I saw Bob shoot up in the middle of the audience, like sprung out of his seat. And I couldn't even look at him because if you can find it on YouTube, my acceptance speech, I start getting emotional because I've just seen Bob. I've seen the guy who challenged me to do this, and here I am. I'm a new artist, and I knew in my back pocket I had just finished Give Me Your Eyes, which is my biggest song. It would become my biggest song. So Give Me Your Eyes hits, and that's how an artist is really launched, on a couple of hits where you got like a little track history. You're not just a one-hit wonder, And so I had a string of hits, but it was Bob Goff, it was Dan Muckala, it was all these great mentors that really just said, you can do this, we're behind you, what are you waiting for?
Man, it's such a challenge to all of us. We hear that because we think that our investment or encouragement in somebody's life is like, they probably don't need to hear it, or it's probably not that big of a deal. But for all of us, there are people in our circle that our words of encouragement, our cheerleading, our Bob Goffness,
Yeah.
can change the trajectory of their life. I'm sure you are
Yes.
very aware of that.
Listen, I just a couple weeks ago, I was out in Wyoming hanging out with a friend, and I was just sitting down kind of like, because, I'm 47 this year. I'm looking back on my adult years, but thinking about the beginning of that journey, were these, who gets Bob as a mentor? And let me tell you, there weren't many other people at that point. He had not written Love Does yet. He was still a lawyer at the time. Wow. He was about to step into the next chapter. And if you've got people listening, he's an author. He's a speaker. He most notably wrote a book called Love Does. And if you go on I think it's in chapter 11, the first 3 words are "my friend Brandon." Mm-hmm. So he tells this story of when we were in D.C. and snuck onto the set of National Treasure 2. Could have been arrested because it was
in the middle of the night, right?
Yes.
In the middle of the night you're doing this.
Yeah. It was the Library of Congress. No big deal. Yeah, we definitely could have been arrested. But I think the statute of limitations has run out on that.
Hopefully.
Anyway, we snuck onto the set, totally walked by Nicolas Cage, but that's Bob. And I went on so many adventures with him, and we're still friends to this day. But to get back to my point, who am I that God, if I'm the seed, that I would fall into that kind of soil? Mm-hmm. That's lavishing love on me. I can't believe the timing, but only God could orchestrate that kind of timing.
Yeah.
And so I feel this huge burden to make good on that opportunity, but also to mentor myself where I can. And I'm learning. I've got a few guys that I meet with. I can't say that I'm doing a great job of it, but
imperfectly, but doing it is better.
Yeah,
that's
I'm trying.
Real life.
I'm trying for sure.
So you see those things like Bob Goff taking an interest in you. What was her name? Anne
Shackleton.
Anne speaking truth. When you look back over those significant relationships in your life, you have this kind of parallel things happening. One of them is your music career is taking off and people are investing in you. But you've also talked about that there were things that you needed to deal with, like forgiving your dad and like in your pockets of your life where you were growing up and maturing and pockets where you weren't, that I'm sure you had to deal with at some point. Do you look back and see other like significant relationships like Anne that helped you over the next hump when it came to your maturity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Al Andrews, the founder of a counseling ministry, if you want to call it, organization called Porter's Call. Porter's Call is only available to recording artists. It's basically funded and underwritten by the music industry, whether it be the Recording Academy, Music Cares, individual record labels. They invest in our mental health. And so they give us free counseling.
Wonderful.
Which is amazing because there's so much addiction, divorce, dysfunction in the music industry.
Sure.
They really, like Al calls it prehab. Let's do rehab now before you actually need rehab.
We don't want to crash and burn.
Yeah. So getting in with, people who are bound by confidentiality, who are trained counselors. I would say it was Al Andrews on the prompting of Bebo Norman when I was out with him on my first tour. Bebo was like, you need to go and sit down with Al Andrews. So I did, and Al is now like a father. He's like a father figure, which is not clean counseling, because typically you have to have some boundaries. But Al is retired now, and we still meet. But yeah, it was Al who kind of called me on some of my stuff. Did it in such a loving, fatherly way. I just needed that. So I'd say it was Al Andrews who brought me into the next phase of my life, convinced me that I was worthy of getting married. And
wow. Did you struggle with that?
Yeah.
Or did you struggle with, I don't think I could do it right because I have a broken history, or?
That's part of it. I mean, maybe that's probably most of it. I think to be honest with you, a lot of it was I was just busy, probably self-centered. It wasn't that I thought that I was too good for marriage or whatever. I would certainly be in relationships on occasion, but I traveled all the time. It was hard to foster a relationship.
It would take a different kind of work.
Yeah, and I had some girlfriends, one in particular that basically was like, I can't marry you. You travel too much. Boy, did that hurt, and boy, am I thankful that she said that. Because when you're searching for that person, you need to have those kind of hard conversations. Otherwise, you're just kind of floating around. And I'm thankful for all the breakups and heartache that I had, because I found my person, which is CB Heath. CB just fits me. I mean, I remember second date, I was like, yeah, you're the one.
Oh my goodness. Was that partly because you'd done some work, so you were ready for it too?
Oh, I had already told my men's group I'm not going to date for 3 months. And I mean, it didn't even take 2 weeks when I started dating CB.
I love those stories.
Yeah. I'm still a work in progress. I think that I will be. So says sanctification. I'm being purified, and that often requires really hot heat to break down the things that just can't stay. God's preparing me for the heavenly home in the sky, and I want to be shaped while I'm here, so that I can love my daughters well. I can love my wife and honor and cherish her and lead her. So it often requires, unfortunately, death. To really live, there's got to be some death that happens. And boy, is that really hard. But I have come through some seasons where I can see the value of just small steps through the fire. You'll get through it, and you'll be better on the other side.
Brandon's newest project is called The Ache, and it's filled with beautiful songs, including the title track that he talked about in this interview, the one that recounts that day sitting in the truck with his dad when he forgave him. I love the whole record, and I think you will too. You can find out more about his music, tour dates, and how Brandon could do a concert in your backyard at brandonheathmusic.com. Thanks so much to Brandon for sharing his story. Thanks to all the folks that helped to make this episode of The Unfolding possible. Michael Shermack, Lindsay Caparoon, our producer and network director, Jason Rackow, and a big thank you to Chris Love and the kind folks at Centricity Music in Franklin, Tennessee, for allowing us to record at their very cool offices. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.